Hello, and welcome to Fermenting Opinions. I am your host, David Papiden.
And your co-host, James McVeigh.
We are Fermenting Opinions, the podcast in search of a more palatable political ferment. This is a little bit of housekeeping. This is episode 5. We actually have to re-release out of order, looks like, following this, episodes 3 and 4, because we suffered a domain hack something, and we lost our website, we lost our podcast feed, we lost everything. We're in the process of coming up from the ashes, a little bit better, a little bit more polished and professional, and
yes,
doing actual audio editing and things like that for people who are actually listening to us on podcast. Trying to have a little bit better of a product for them moving forward. So look forward to the now vintage episodes 3 and 4.
That will be re-released. Yes,
in 3 and 4 were we talked about 3 was Art of Deflection, I think.
Yes.
Which I think is a useful one. Good logic tools there, and 4 was the special elections and Democrats sucking and police getting away with murder.
Yeah, essentially, yes. My man Philip Castile.
Which is not hyperbolic at all.
Yeah, right.
It's not hyperbolic at all. But those are going to be the vintage episodes. They're going to come back at some point. They'll be out of order so you'll see like 5, 3, 4, and go, what's going on here? That's what's going on. That's maybe as much for me as anybody who might be listening to this. But today we have a very very heavy, very data-heavy discussion for you. We're talking about Sergei Magnitsky and the Bill Browder testimony. And if you don't know those names or who they are, it's because this Bill Browder hearing, he testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Yes, he did on July 27th. But that was right in the middle of our really short-lived, beautiful bird in the sun, Anthony Scaramucci.
Yeah,
as,
this was Mucha Mageddon. And you know,
the Mooch, as he's affectionately called.
The Mooch. No one knew about this thing, which this guy Browder lays some really heavy allegations about Russian collusion, corruption, murder, really, really intense stuff. And nobody knows a damn thing about it because everyone was listening to Scaramucci talking about Bannon sucking his own cock.
Yeah.
And murdering leakers, and I can't remember what else he said.
Being a fucking schizophrenic psycho or something like that.
Paranoid schizophrenic.
Fucking paranoid schizophrenic.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and he was just ridiculous and over the top, and he sounded like a guy on a coke binge, and he was really hilarious to listen to. And he was a bright, shiny object, and so... And this is one of the things before we started shooting. I talked about. I listened to a lot of other podcasts, a lot of things that are political in nature. I haven't heard anybody talk about the Browder testimony.
I searched high and low and could find links to the actual Senate testimony, right. And we did find the Atlantic ran before he testified. I think about a week before he testified. The Atlantic ran an article, kind of presenting his prepared statements and giving you a quick little rundown of who Bill Browder is. And it really, even at face value, when I saw it, I was like, this is a really long article. I don't know if I'm reading this. Do I really care? So I figured I'd give it a
gets
shot.
a little TLDR.
Yeah, but by the time I got into about 2 or 3 pages of it, I was just like, wow, this is powerful, powerful stuff. And it's very well written, but it is fact-heavy and very detailed. So we are going to link to it, I believe, in our description for this episode.
In our show notes, if you go on our website, fermentingopinions.com, I'm going to link both the Browder testimony, the YouTube video of that, as well as the Atlantic article with his prepared sort of opening statements, which sort of are featured as the first 7 or 10 minutes of the testimony. So that's for you guys to review, and we're basically sort of covering all of that and hitting the high notes. But there's so much data in there. It's going to be terrible radio to try and recreate the whole thing.
It will be. I've done my best to kind of keep a quick synopsis of it, so I'm not boring you guys.
So we're trying to work
badly.
a narrative of it, essentially.
And please forgive my absolute ignorance of the Russian language and Russian names. I'm going to do my best.
Disclaimer now, we're probably going to butcher some of these names.
Bear with me while I do it.
The way the Russians butcher people who get on the wrong side of them.
As we will cover that too. That will be discussed.
So let's go into it. This was, again, July 27th, Bill Browder testimony. Well, again, before we get into it, there was a little bit of noise about, I guess, a Democratic procedural move, saying that he was cut short in his testimony. The little bit of noise this thing created, a lot, I guess, some right leaning.
Breitbart and the Daily Caller, I think, reported that
The Democrats cut it short or something like that.
They cut it off when he started talking about fusion.
Well, what happened is these hearings can go for 2 hours at a time, apparently, and that's some kind of procedural rule was being cut off. And it was being observed on the 26th. Remember, Browder's testimony was the 27th. On the 26th, it was observed that the cutoff was reached, and so they recessed and they came back, and Browder gave his testimony on the 27th. The narrative, of course, was that the Democrats shut it down to indicate I don't know what. But they just hang that albatross around their neck, essentially.
I believe the nefarious intent there that they were kind of pushing onto.
Because Hillary was in bed with them over
was the Fusion GPS is what it was about. The same company that Veselnitskaya, the Russian attorney,
we're going to get into that.
We'll discuss her. Apparently, she had hired Fusion GPS as part of her smear campaign against Magnitsky and Browder, and I guess the Republican side of this, or the far right, like neoconservative alt-right end, is that that would be impossible conflict of interest, and that this is a made-up story somehow because they were also investigating Trump at the same time with Michael Steele and that Trump dossier. Fusion GPS was responsible for the production of that as well.
I see.
And so they're saying the Democrats wanted to cut that off because something nefarious conflicts of interest.
Was going to expose them
something
something
like
that. That's really just a bunch of hot air, as far as we can tell. And we have to caveat so many things here because there's so much out here that's opinion. There's some speculation involved. There's a million names. There's a million gauntlets thrown down. If somebody takes umbrage with something that we've said or that we're repeating, if they say no, we've got our facts wrong, challenge us, call us out, or politely correct us. We're on Facebook. We've got the website.
You can find a page, and there's actually a closed group for actual further discussion, Fermenting Opinions as well.
Yeah.
You'll find our page that's public. You'll find a closed group as well if you would like to access that and
come tell us they're wrong. And you can leave comments on the website as well.
Of course, and you'll run into us all the time commenting on things you'll post if you go to that Facebook group. We always engage. Like we're pretty well active,
Yeah.
So we'd be happy to hear about it if I get something wrong, especially if I'm giving you this narrative and I'm wrong about something. Please call me out on it. I'm happy to respond, and we can get the facts settled and straight.
Right. So who's Bill Browder?
Well, this is a fun story. So Bill Browder is the founder. I'm sorry. Everyone sit down and get comfortable. It's story time. Bill Browder was an American citizen. He is now a British citizen, but he was the founder and CEO of Hermitage Capital Management, which was a capital investment firm that moved into place in Russia after the fall of the USSR when capitalism took off there. And from 1996 to 2005, Hermitage was one of the largest investment advisors in Russia, period. They were holding more than $4 billion in Russian stock. They are worth quite a bit of money. Mr. Browder is very wealthy. And so early on, I guess, in the year 2000, I think is when Putin was actually elected president of Russia, and one of his campaign things was he wanted to fight the oligarchs. He wanted to fight Russian corruption and things like that. And this was something Mr. Browder was into as well. They kind of ran in the same circles Putin and Browder did in the fighting of this corruption stuff.
And explain why a little bit, because as I understand it, as I read it, that Browder in his company was discovering there was so much corruption. It's inherent in...
They discovered massive
in anything Russian business, Russian politics, Russian anything. It was Russian, there's corruption involved.
Yeah, and there was always accusations.
And it was costing them money.
But yeah, and that's the thing, is Browder brings that up, he discovered the actual extent of Russian oligarch corruption, how much money they were stealing by misappropriating taxes and taxpayer funds paid by these people. And later turning around and accusing them of stealing it, essentially. And so what they would do is Browder would pay people to investigate this and push the findings to international media and national media. And Putin was on board and was entirely cool with it until until July of 2003, when Putin decided he was going to prosecute the biggest, baddest, richest oligarch on the block. His name is Mikhail.
Right, so at this point, before you get into that...
Oh, yeah, sorry.
At this point, most of us, especially on the left, most of us who are really taking a sober view of this at all, are looking at Putin like a bad guy, right? At this point in time, Browder's firm was looking to Putin as a guy who's gonna administer justice here.
Yes, exactly.
That they are going to the government, they're reporting to these officials. This is the corruption. These are the guys doing it. Go get them, kind of thing.
Exactly.
And so
their interests coincided until, like I said, in July 2003, Putin arrested, prosecuted the biggest, baddest oligarch on the block named Mikhail Khodorkovsky or something of that nature. I'm sorry.
Something about pierogies. That's what I got.
Classy.
I had to.
Pierogies, for the record, pierogies are delicious. And
they really are. They're fantastic.
Anyway.
I digress.
So after he was convicted, I guess the rest of the big player oligarchs kind of came to Putin secretly and said, how do we not end up like this guy? Because, I mean, what the hell, dude? And apparently Putin's response was, I want 50%. Right.
And this is an important point of possible contention, because I was reading through this. I was like, well, how do we know it was 50%? I'm a skeptic. I'm skeptical that a good skeptic should be skeptical of pretty much anything.
Sure.
Any claim that we have Browder saying that Putin said 50%. I don't know how he got that number. During the testimony, he was queried a little bit on this, and essentially he left it up to sort of his impression based on his understanding of how corruption worked in Russia, of how politics worked in Russia, that it was his, he'd sort of interpolated that as this thing moved forward and the change in Putin's disposition towards these oligarchs who were engaged in fraud and embellishment and extortion, these things, that his tone changed completely overnight after he put this guy in a cage on stage essentially and sort of held him up as an example of what these other guys didn't want to have happen to him. It was his, and this I guess is his opinion, was 50% or something like it.
Essentially, though, we can pretty much, at least it seems, based on the actions we're going to discuss, that Putin told these people, I want my cut.
Yeah, that he wanted a cut.
Yeah.
And that seems like the most likely outcome. But again, we don't know. How do you find facts on something like that? I think it's an important thing to think about, is because someone's going to push back on this and say it's a giant. We've got our tinfoil hats on.
Well, sure.
And we're just being crazy. So how do you know it's 50%?
Well,
it's a hard question.
I don't know if it's 50% or not, but I can tell you, at least based on Browder's testimony, if we're going to give a sworn statement the kernel of belief that it kind of deserves until you can impeach the evidence, it's pretty clear Putin wanted something monetary value-wise. And we'll get into how we kind of determine that in a little bit.
Right.
But
so the how much may be a little bit gray, but the fact that there was a change in the way Putin was acting towards these oligarchs and in terms of this prosecution
overnight,
is an overnight change.
All of a sudden,
and that's how we know something happened.
Yeah. And we can get into a little bit more about
sure.
that. We will. But so that happened in July of 2003. On November 13th of 2005, Mr. Browder was trying to enter back into Moscow, and he was detained in Russia, denied entry, held for some 14 hours or so, and then he was deported and declared a threat to national security.
Right.
And he was told basically, you can never come back to Russia. So,
which probably the best thing that
happened. Yeah, I guess so. But he was just kind of awestruck, like, what in the hell is going on here? 18 months later, the Interior Ministry had agents raid his capital investment firm, Hermitage, and the office of a U.S. law firm that represented Hermitage, where they seized all corporate documents connected to investment holding companies of the funds Browder was advising and controlling. And I guess this is the point where Sergei Magnitsky enters stage left. Browder was like, okay, what the hell? And his response was, who's the smartest, most adept lawyer I know in Russia? Sergei Magnitsky comes to mind. So he hires Magnitsky and says, can you find out why they did this?
And he says that too in his testimony, that he names him early on for basically just being a super crackerjack lawyer, essentially. Yeah,
essentially,
being
like
the guy who was
the guy he would trust
all
most,
over this.
You know.
And this was before, I guess, Putin flipped, essentially.
Oh yeah,
that he had hired him before to root out all this corruption going on, and to root out the oligarchs.
No, actually, I want to correct that. I believe Magnitsky was not hired until after the Interior Ministry raided Browder's office. He used a different law firm to do the research early on. No, he hired Magnitsky specifically to find out what happened with his stolen documents involving his investment holding companies. He wanted to know why they do this, essentially. So Sergei does his thing. Mr. Magnitsky goes on and he finds that the Interior Ministry used those documents to fraudulently re-register Hermitage's investment holding companies to a man named Viktor Markelov, who is a criminal convicted of manslaughter.
And that's by the Russians.
Yes, the Russian government had convicted this own man of manslaughter.
So who knows what he...
But they set him up as the new owner of all these companies. And then the companies were used to misappropriate some $230 million in the previous year's taxes Hermitage had already paid.
That's an important number to remember as we go forward.
I will reference it quite a bit.
This is a very tangled web, guys.
But essentially, they basically fraudulently re-registered the companies through a criminal that they were controlling, and they used it to steal $230 million in taxes that were being paid by Hermitage the year before on their investments in the country. So, I guess Browder and Magnitsky talk about this, and both of them are convinced, even still after this oligarch change with Putin, that this had to have been done by rogue agents, and that we should file criminal complaints everywhere we can, which they do. And then Sergei actually goes to Russia's equivalent of the FBI, the Russian State Investigative Committee, and basically gives them sworn statements as to everything he's found. This is what happened.
They essentially, you
guys have people in the Interior Ministry like just straight stealing from you, like this is going down. And a few days later, on November 24th, 2008, Magnitsky was arrested at home by the same agents and agency he had been cooperating with.
In front of his family.
In front of his family, dragged out of his house, and thrown into pretrial detention, where he would spend the next 358 days and where he would die. He is basically pressed by them over and over again to withdraw his testimony and take credit for the theft of this money.
Yeah. So as I understand, they essentially, they're trying to get him to
recant,
flip, to recant
what he's given his sworn testimony.
And they
say it was
torture this guy. They, according to the testimony, that they lock him in a cell with no windows and no heat in the middle of winter,
coming out of the floor and no toilet, and
in the middle of winter in Russia. And
over a certain period of months, he develops pancreatitis and gallstones that are horrible. And he's scheduled for surgery, but they continue to move him from one facility to another, denying him medical care essentially, and putting him in worse and worse conditions until they have to make a move to send him.
He was scheduled for surgery.
He was, and they had to make a move to get him to emergency surgery at the point where they put him in a max security place with no medical facility at all.
Right. Yeah.
He started dying essentially, and they were like, "We got to do something with him." So they sent him to a place. Another prison with a medical facility, but when he got there, they tied him to a bed and beat him to death, essentially.
Yep. They said he was found dead the next morning or whatever. According to the oral testimony of Browder, that they beat him with rubber batons, rubber billy clubs, I guess, until he died. Is what his words were there. That essentially they just, I guess they had, it went as far as it was going to go. They got who knows. But
Bill Browder, being a rich man who's not allowed back into Russia, when he finds out this news the next morning and it's told to him that his attorney's been killed and everything else, he basically swears a blood oath and it's vengeance time.
Yep.
So he starts trying to figure out what he needs to do. He has other lawyers try to file criminal complaints against the agents involved, things like that. But instead of Russia, acknowledging that this man has been beaten to death, they circle the wagons and pardon everybody who touched Magnitsky.
And they actually they gave out commendations, I believe.
Yes, they promoted people.
Certain, I guess, officials who were involved in this. That not only were they exonerated by the government, that they were actually given promotions and accolades and things like that.
And so, at this point, Magnitsky's passed away at this point. But Bill Browder has gone on this mission now. And he has come to the United States and started meeting with congressmen. I believe
because he knew he was going to get no justice in Russia.
Yeah, and he
comes here.
And he says, he comes up with this idea and thinks, they're laundering all of their money that they steal in the West anyway. Why don't we push for some kind of human rights violation law that will allow them to freeze their assets and to ban their visas so they can't come to the West, so they can't get their money, so that their money is essentially frozen here.
And to expand on that a little bit. That these Russian oligarchs, they were embezzling, they were extorting, they were engaged in graft, and they were acquiring all this money, and it was ill-gotten. They were coming to the U.S., they were coming to the West, but I guess specifically United States, to launder the money by investing in real estate and investing in other interests here, including, I believe, some of Trump's holdings, some of his real estate projects.
I don't know about that.
Is that a bridge too far? Is that a tinfoil hat too tight?
It might be, but apparently we'll find out about that in the future. Anyway, Mr. Mueller is apparently investigating that.
Gotcha.
But
that's, if you're reading between the lines as you read this thing and as you watch this thing, you're saying they're going here and they're investing heavily in real estate. And who does real estate?
Essentially, especially in New York. But
yeah.
But either way, the long and short of this is that Mr. Browder then comes to America and to push for this kind of these kind of sanctions.
And so he goes to McCain, and I can't remember the other guy.
There was a Democrat he went to as well, and I mean, this stuff took off like gangbusters in 2012. I mean, it did not take long at all for this to pass with majorities in the House and the Senate, and for Obama to sign it in law.
Yeah, it passed easily, as I recall. It went right through.
The Magnitsky Act is thus born. So we have what's called the Magnitsky Act. It is also now a global act, so all of Western Europe is involved in it as well. It's all based on the idea of we can freeze your assets and ban your visas in the West for human rights violations committed by Russian companies or Russian agents or Russian citizens.
It's the mob. That's the easiest way to think of it.
That's exactly
these are mafia type thugs, and they've got crap tons of ill-gotten money. They're trying to launder it, and the West, and again specifically U.S., are saying, no, you can't come here. Your money can't come here. We're not going to do business with you because we know how you got that money. This is our way of keeping you from really accessing and enjoying those funds.
Exactly. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use civil asset forfeiture to take them from you.
Right. To
punish you, to hit you in the pocketbook, because it's about all we can do.
Civil asset forfeiture. Say, to explain to me.
There's a rabbit.
We're not going to go too far down, but just for the laity, which includes myself, to say, well, what does that mean? Does that mean, like, if they came over here and they did buy something already, that we can take it? That the U.S. government can take it?
If you have property or funds involved in illegal activity, under U.S. law, federal law, and state law, you are subject to what is called civil asset forfeiture. And the best way to explain that is, say you get pulled over and you got, like, a couple kilos of coke in the old trunk of the Ford Taurus you're banging through, state lines with.
Okay.
And you also have, $50,000 in cash. Well, there's probable cause to believe that money was used in a crime, and so the state will seize that money. And then we'll essentially put your money on trial where you have to come in and prove, by preponderance of the evidence, so more likely than not, 51% or so, that money is from legitimate gains and is not related to crime.
Gotcha.
And if you can't prove it, then we keep your money.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do with the Magnitsky Act, is if we find that you or your people or whatever are named or added to the list of names of human rights violators and you're trying to funnel money through the West, we'll freeze it, we'll deny you from coming to get it, and then we'll put it on trial, and we'll take it from you, and we'll reappropriate your money that you stole.
That's right. And this made Putin upset.
Oh, yeah, to put it frankly...
Putin didn't like this
I would say that the best frank way to put it is Putin was fucking pissed. He was very, very pissed. And his immediate response was he banned Americans from adopting Russian children.
And there's an important point to make here, that it was already against the law in Russia to adopt out of country children who were healthy, of sound body and mind. So the only kids who were available for adoption in the first place are ones with disabilities. So birth defects, intellectual disabilities,
HIV, intellectual disabilities, behavior problems, children.
These are children who really were not going to have a future outside of being adopted out into the West.
And that's really what made it such a cruel
and this
move. Because
shows how completely fucking sadistic Vladimir Putin is. If that's, I cannot be clearer on that as a person who works with some of these populations professionally. It fucking sickens me. That's the only way I can describe it. Yeah,
because basically Americans, by and large, were still coming to Russia to adopt these children.
Absolutely.
Who were declared
I've worked with children who've come out of Russia.
Exactly, and Americans were still adopting these children, by and large, like coming into the country and providing homes for them. But the sad fact is that a vast majority of these kids die before they're 18 in Russia anyway, as part of their orphan care system. Because I mean, they just don't care for people that they declare
value
defective.
of human life is low over there anyway, and it's so much worse for these populations.
You got ADHD, no one gives a shit about you.
Well, I mean,
it's not that.
That's bad. Not. I mean, ADHD is like maybe the lightest of the.
Yeah, but either way, this essentially is that if you were declared defective health-wise in any kind of way by Russia, you're pretty much, and you're an orphan, you're pretty much condemned to die in an orphanage before
it's
you're
gonna
going to hit adulthood.
It's going to go very badly. The life outcomes are extremely bleak.
And so we as Americans were adopting these kids hand over fist anyway.
Yeah.
Just trying to help. And so that was his blowback on it. Was the first thing he did was ban American adoptions, period. And this kind of surprised a lot of people and wondering why is he so upset about this until the Panama Papers leaked. And we could do a whole episode on the Panama Papers.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too far into that either.
That's a massive rabbit trail we're not going to go down.
But
tonight.
I will briefly mention that the Panama Papers did reveal that Vladimir Putin was a direct beneficiary of the $230 million that was stolen from Bill Browder's investment holding companies that Magnitsky died for.
Right.
As well as an additional $2 billion.
When we were explaining the asset forfeiture, that's why that's relevant here.
Is it opens him up to personal liability. Putin himself is liable to the Magnitsky Act. His Western monies can be seized. He can be banned from coming to Western countries. Personally. He's personally subject to it. That's why he's so pissed. That's why he is working so hard to have the Magnitsky Act repealed.
Gotcha. So where do we go from here?
Well, as part of this whole thing, Browder's testimony alleges that Vladimir Putin is the richest man in the world. Yeah. That his asset value is roughly $200 billion, and that he keeps it all in the West, highly vulnerable to asset forfeiture. So
this is hugely damaging for him.
It is, very much so.
And this, again, if we've got our tinfoil hats on a little bit, this is all the MO in the world that he would need to want to influence the outcome of an election.
Certainly.
Because all his damn money is riding on it.
He's been running Russia for 17 years, yes. Yeah. And all of his ill-gotten gains, according to Browder, roughly $200 billion, is here in our country.
That whether or not he did, if we're going to state this in the most parsimonious fashion possible, that it would be of interest to him to have an administration that is friendly to him and would be inclined to repeal the Magnitsky Act.
Yes.
Okay? Whether or not he did anything. If you are a diehard, there was no Russian collusion, there was no Russian hacking of the DNC or any of these things. Even if all that's true, it is still a fact that this is something that Putin would want. Putin would want an administration that's friendly to him and would repeal this act so he could get his damn money.
Well, also, let's keep in mind that we keep talking about this $230 million.
Right.
There was actually an asset forfeiture case brought through the Magnitsky Act based on that because that money was being attempted to be used to launder into high-value Manhattan real estate. That's where you're getting your New York stuff. But that $230 million, where they were trying to buy up very high-value Manhattan real estate with it so that they could launder that money. We caught them in the act of that, and it tied directly into Magnitsky, so we opened a civil asset forfeiture case against it. And before we actually talk about what happened with that, I think we should talk about how this actually ties into why do we care? What does this have to do with the price of tea in China, essentially?
Well, yeah, that's, I mean, where we come back around on this is...
Exactly, and so...
part of the campaign, I guess we'll call it, to have the Magnitsky Act repealed, which also includes...
these are assumed to be Putin's own personal efforts, is actually paying for, using the Russian government to fund and pay for assets and resources.
Per Browder, again.
To repeal the Magnitsky Act. And he talks about how last year a group of Russians actually came to Washington to start a lobbying campaign to repeal the act.
And they came in under NGO, non-governmental organization.
Yes.
A company called...
the Human Rights Accountability Global Initiative Foundation, which just smells like a bullshit front right off the bat.
Yeah,
I was joking earlier that at least Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton had the decency to shorten their bullshit foundation name to just the Clinton Foundation. So you knew it was bullshit up front. But
oh yeah.
Sorry, that
not
was
going there. He had to.
Had to do it.
Still
but anyway,
right-wing. It's okay.
So we had to do that anyway. But the Russian government did this, and that they paid for this, essentially, is what Browder is saying. And they came here last year, and they were spearheaded by a woman named Natalia Veselnitskaya.
Yeah.
Now, I forgive you if you haven't heard that name, because I think we're probably the bravest of any kind of punditry that's trying to pronounce it.
Veselnitskaya, we've heard several different people say the name, so we think that's an approximate. I think we're pretty good on that one.
If you're good with names and you saw it in print, you may notice that this is the Russian lawyer woman that Donald Trump Jr. met with last year.
Yeah, and who had emailed him.
Well, his friend had emailed him to set the meeting up. But
his friend
emailed
the pop
him and
star
said,
manager.
This is a representative of the Russian government who is very much on your father's campaign side, and we have dirt on Hillary Clinton. We want to trade it, essentially.
Right. And so this is a lady who's been operating in the U.S. as part of this campaign.
To smear Magnitsky and Browder.
To smear these two and to try and get the Magnitsky Act repealed.
Yes.
And through this intermediary is wanting to meet with Trump Jr.,
Jared Kushner,
Paul Manafort, and I can't remember who. There's some goon Russian spy type guy.
Oh, what is
Not
my
spy,
man's name?
but
No, he's a former
difference?
spy. Yes, he's a former spy. His name is Renat Akhmetshin. He's a former Soviet intelligence officer and naturalized as an American citizen.
Right, and he's
been working with Veselnitskaya to
right, and so all these people were at the meeting, by the way, and so according to
the Don Jr. meeting,
the Donnie Jr. meeting,
yes,
and
the one according to them was about Russian adoptions,
right.
So the fun story here is,
yeah.
What's the relevance of Russian adoptions? What's the relevance of Russian adoptions to the money, to the Magnitsky Act, to everything else? Well.
Right, the adoption ban was
based
a consequence.
on the Magnitsky Act. Repeal the Magnitsky Act, we'll give the adoptions back. In exchange, we have dirt on Hillary Clinton for you.
Yeah, and this is all the motive in the world that's needed right here.
Okay,
I mean, it's
so
obvious.
And let's talk about one other thing. Miss Veselnitskaya was allowed into this country by the Department of Justice last year under Loretta Lynch's personal exception, because she was here also to defend the Russian interests in the $230 million in the Magnitsky Act civil asset forfeiture case.
And do you think
that was her main purpose of being here? That's the only reason she was granted a visa. It was a very limited exception. She conducted all of these meetings with Don Jr. The lobbying act stuff was outside of the scope.
Do you think Lynch knew who this person was,
I doubt
or
it.
what? There may be some.
You could always say there was something nefarious
again,
here that might have been Clinton related, I guess, or you could try to make the conspiracy draw there, but I don't think so. She had a legitimate claim to be here as an attorney representing the money and trying to get it unfrozen. I mean, we have due process in America. We firmly believe in our 5th and 14th Amendment right to due process. We're not going to try to hold up even foreign nationals from being able to defend themselves in court, or civil court or criminal court. And if you want to choose an attorney out of Russia to come here and represent you, and they can be allowed pro hoc vice to do so by following our rules,
sure, then,
I mean, we're not going to deny them. And I think that's why she was granted that limited visa exception. But it's important to talk about that case specifically, because we very, very quietly settled that case in less than a month ago for $6 million. So we essentially let Russia and Russian interests really
run away with
would have $224 million back of the money that Magnitsky died for. We settled
again,
for 6.
and this was the
case
the money appropriated from Browder's. That was essentially stolen via.
This would be Sessions' DOJ. Sessions is not recused from this. Yeah. This is his Department of Justice and under his command.
And they let it go. Essentially,
down to $6 million, which is just a slap on the wrist out of $230 million.
Yeah, that's a pretty good payday for
especially when you consider the fact that with civil asset forfeiture cases, it is very easy to win them in general.
As you had outlined earlier,
is the basis of the law which was created, allowing for it to happen. The assistant U.S. attorneys prosecuting this could have literally slept through the trial at their table and still won.
So it's about as black as, I mean, if you're saying this thing was so egregious that they made a law saying this shit you can't do.
Yeah, and we'll take your money.
And we'll take your money.
And this was the basis
of that law. And it's become, I guess, sort of an internationally accepted, amongst, I guess, certain other countries that have signed on to it, with regards to the West and all that. It's this bad, and our DOJ let it go for $6 million, $224 million. Basically going back to Russia?
Right into Putin's pocket, essentially.
Right into Putin's pocket.
If the Panama Papers and Bill Browder's testimony are to be believed independently, because they're
tinfoil hat. The actual people being sued it was two brothers or something?
No, father and son.
Was it?
Peter Katsev was the actual man.
There's two
who was trying to launder the money in Manhattan real estate is what he was doing, but we caught him in the middle of it. We traced that money back to Hermitage Holdings. Realized, this is Bill Browder stuff, this is Magnitsky Act stuff, this is the whole basis of this law we created. Yeah, fuck you guys, we're keeping your money. You can come see us in court. Well, they did, and they brought in.
Well, they never go to court. They settled.
Well, yeah, that's true. I'm sure there's still plenty of court hearing stuff if you wanted to look it up. I'm sure there's been hearings all day long about it. But the trial itself was settled on the eve of trial, very, very quietly. No one. You haven't heard.
Was there a date? Do you have a date from when that was settled?
I do not, but I could look it up. It wouldn't take me.
But again, there was a lot of there was a lot of shiny objects in the media at that time. Again, coming back to the fact that I listen to podcasts. You listen to some podcasts. Yes, we watch the media. We watch the news.
I stay very up on my news.
Very little on this overall because everyone was watching the shiny objects. And I'm not saying that that's deliberate. I would not credit the Trump administration with that amount of calculation.
I would be extremely impressed if they
brought in
Scaramucci just to diffuse the Browder bomb.
But whether or not it was deliberate or whether or not that was just dumbass luck on their part, no one really seems to be noticing this. And either we're cuckoos for talking about this thing, but it seems really damn ugly.
Another fun fact I'd like to bring up.
So we wanted to talk about.
Speaking of damn ugly and just like random little tidbits of information, our friend, the former Soviet intelligence officer that was at the Don Jr. meeting, Rinat Akhmetchin. I'm trying, guys. I'm really trying on the pronunciation, but
they're bad.
Mr. Akhmetchin has been involved in a number of similar Magnitsky Act repeal campaigns where he's been accused of various unethical and potentially illegal actions like computer hacking and stealing data and information.
Again, the skeptic senses tingling. Accused of. He's not been convicted.
Of course not,
This is like saying, well, Clinton was accused of this.
But I mean, when we talk about, how much coverage James Comey got for just saying Trump might have obstructed justice and I didn't feel like he did at the time, there's so much more here to unpack. Like, this should have been fireworks and bombshells. I didn't know about this testimony until a week after it happened.
Yeah, that's true.
I just happened upon this article. Happened upon this article, and I thought, oh man, I've always been curious about the origin of the Magnitsky Act. Let me look that up.
Oh, what is
And I was just
what does Littlefinger say?
Chaos is a ladder.
Chaos is a ladder.
Chaos is a ladder, and there's nothing but the climb.
Yep.
I mean,
again, not to credit with intent on part of the Trump administration or anything else.
And I could clearly tell you.
But there's so much chaos going on. If there's anybody really pulling the strings, it's going to be
now. But since this has happened, and since we've talked about this, and since we finally got our website back on the rails and everything, wahoo!
By the way, thank you, Ross James and RossJames.com.
Got to plug him.
He is a. I've never met a wizard before.
He is a wizard. At the very least,
that's really just what he does. He's a wizard.
He's a gentleman and a scholar. At the very least.
Expound out beyond that if you want to meet a wizard. He's a wizard, and we thank him very much for all his effort and assistance and helping making this thing run. So,
he is a wonderful person.
There's the plug. All right, moving on.
But yes, so this is what becomes interesting to me is that in the last few days, the Wall Street Journal has published an article saying that Special Counsel Mueller has impaneled a grand jury in Washington, D.C., specifically for the purpose of investigating this meeting with Don Jr. Everyone at the meeting has been subpoenaed, so we're told, and unless we get some serious leaks going on, we're not going to know anything else until the shit hits the fan from there.
And we can sit here and talk about it and speculate.
But
and
we also discussed
But really,
this.
It's going to come down to Mueller and what he digs up.
And we discussed this before on the podcast, actually, with the impeachment episode, is that a grand jury, once it's impaneled, can last up to 18 months on a federal level. So this grand jury investigation, by itself, can last 18 months. So don't expect any fireworks yet, but I thought it was very important of us, or for us, to get here and talk about Bill Browder and to talk about the testimony that most people aren't aware of.
Because I feel like these names are going to come back. And
I also feel like, well, I mean, just based on the dates and times of when this stuff happened, Mr. Mueller impaneled that grand jury like a few days after Browder testified. And you know Mr. Muller's watching.
Yeah. If none of the rest of us are paying any attention to this because we're listening to Scaramucci be like Trump's id, like with a microphone. Mueller is watching this. So we're gonna, really just see what develops from that. It seems incomprehensible to me that this isn't going to result in indictments.
I would say so too, but I want to stress the main reason I wanted to talk about this, the main thing that makes it important as far as this Russian collusion investigation, all this hoopla goes. This gives us Putin's motivation. This is something that, generally the Democrats and the liberal media and everything else have just been pushing this idea that Russia's a bad guy and they're bad people. We're not going to explain why because we really can't explain why. We just know we don't like them, and it's not cool that we got a foreign government involved in this election hacking.
Well, this really puts a little meat on those bones. Exactly. So why don't we like Russia? Because
this is why you should not get along with Vladimir Putin. This is why Vladimir Putin is a bad person.
Horrible, murdering.
I mean, Magnitsky filed over 400 complaints in the time he was incarcerated. Yeah. It is the worst documented case of human rights violations out of a developed country, possibly ever.
Yeah. In terms of human rights violations,
and it was a direct.
These are the baddest people like in the game, essentially.
Yeah,
but this is about as bad as it gets, folks.
Yeah, this is terrible.
And so when you have people, naively look at Russia, they're not our enemies. Yes, maybe Russia, enemy's not the right word, but like they're sure as shit not our friends.
Creepy eye contact, camera time. Russia is our adversary. If you think differently, you are wrong. They are juxtaposed to the wishes and desires of Western culture, period. They are not good. They are bad. Russia is bad. Vladimir Putin is bad. Just so we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
This is why. This is a great example of why. But not only is it a good example of why, it actually builds a foundation of what was Putin's interest in being involved in interfering with these elections. I mean, what's his end of it?
Yeah.
And what might have been a payoff?
A crap ton of money.
Where did the agreement come in? What was the quid pro quo? And I think this is a good foundation if you're going to speculate at stuff, because we are obviously speculating. But, man, there's a lot of evidence here.
Yeah,
and there's a reason the Senate Judiciary Committee wanted this evidence presented. I mean, someone knew what was going on. We didn't just pick Bill Browder out of a hat.
We could say that, where there's smoke, there is not necessarily fire, but the inference to the best explanation here is that there. What did you say? There's a there there.
There's a there there. This is the there there is what it seems like to me.
That this is what it was really all about.
I love that we have the there there for this potential impeachment, and the last one we has what is.
To fall right off.
We're full of just syntax errors as far as our questions that we want to ask about impeachment situations. But
couple, I guess, just to. Mentioning, and this was included in the testimony, and this I'm almost really segueing here.
Sure.
That the people who have been around and involved with the creation of the Magnitsky Act, I guess on Russia's part, that there was a guy, Boris Nemtsov, if I'm saying his name right.
Mr. Nemtsov.
I needed to
yes.
Just so people have a clearer understanding of why it's so fucking funny that people talk about Hillary Clinton having people whacked, that have been associated. These are the people that really have people whacked. Yeah, Nemtsov is the perfect example. He argued in favor of Magnitsky Act. He said it was good for the Russian people because, they're being robbed and extorted. And it was only going to punish the oligarchs and not punish the Russian people.
It narrowly targeted corrupt officials and not the Russian people.
Exactly. That this was a good thing for Russia. This was a good thing for everybody except the oligarchs. And guess what happened? He was murdered on a bridge in front of the Kremlin.
In front of the Kremlin, guys. Like, in front
right
of it.
there. There's, and that's not an accident, I mean,
that's a scene
it's
out of a
really
movie.
not an accident.
That's
Was he shot, as I recall?
I
don't think, it doesn't go into it there, but I think I kind of remember him being gunned down.
He might have been.
But anyway.
But he testified in front of our Congress, European Parliament, Canadian Parliament, and
talked
other
to all these
legislative
people
bodies to get this Magnitsky Act.
He told them it was a good thing, and he died. So that's two people, at least, that have been killed over this thing.
Also, let's talk about his protege, Vladimir Kara-Murza.
Kara-Murza was poisoned and had, this was last year, I think.
It was.
20, I think December of 2016. So this is after the election, guys.
Well, he was poisoned because Alexander, and I'm trying to get Bostrikin, the head of the Russian Investigative Committee, the one that was pushing to basically arrest Magnitsky and get him to recant. He was added to the Magnitsky list in December of 2016.
Right. So this looks like reprisal. This is when you're looking for a pattern of behavior. This would be it. Because Kara-Murza was poisoned. Several of his organs shut down. He went into a coma. He did survive narrowly. And so that was almost 3.
These are people giving knowledgeable testimony in favor of the Magnitsky Act that are being targeted.
Right.
I mean,
and another person involved in this who almost died, and it was actually right before he was going to give testimony. It was actually Sergei Magnitsky's mother's lawyer, whose name I didn't record here.
His name is
you guys. This is. I mean, you guys are not going to remember.
His name is Nikolai Gorokov.
Gorokov. There you go. And he was thrown off a 4-story apartment building. And he also barely survived that. But that was like 2 weeks before he was supposed to testify, I think.
But he's continuing on.
He's continuing on.
Has not been silenced despite being thrown off a 4th floor.
I'd have probably a permanent attitude problem if that happened to me. And I would probably not have any other reason to live at that point other than revenge. Yes. So I can understand that. But these guys are playing a really dangerous game. I mean, there's lots of explicit and implicit threats have been made against all the actors pushing back against the Russian machine here. What is it, Medvedev, who
actually said.
Now, and if you remember back, Putin appointed him as president or whatever.
Prime Minister. He's prime minister of. And he was at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland in 2013. He was talking about Magnitsky, and issued basically
it's a shame that Magnitsky is dead and that Browder is alive. Is what he said.
He said it's too bad that Sergei Magnitsky is dead and Bill Browder is still alive and free. I mean, it's essentially a tacit death threat against Browder.
Yeah, these are bad people. I mean, imagine being in this situation yourself, being involved in this, and seeing people around you really die. I don't know.
Which always led to the question of how are they even putting on this smear campaign against Magnitsky? Like, well, you had this lawyer who's known for being very ethical.
But that's how Russian propaganda works.
358 days not buying their shit until he dies.
Right.
Not folding.
And that was something, I don't think did we include that or not? That, again, guys, sorry, there's so much information here. That there was actually a trial held in the absence of dead air. I'm trying to... These guys were Magnitsky and
Bill Browder
in Russia, convicting both of them. For, I don't know what.
Yeah, they were
convicted of. Okay, go ahead, vamp for a second.
They were convicted of stealing that $230 million. Is what they were convicted of. They were
blamed for the theft.
They were blamed
that
for
Putin actually was responsible for. There you go.
And I mean, again, this is. I feel like this helps, and I really hope this has helped you guys kind of get an understanding of where Vladimir Putin's coming from and why he would be involved.
And also how Russian propaganda works. There's a machine. You say Putin is guilty of a thing, and he accuses the people that he robbed of being guilty of it. If this sounds familiar to anybody who pays attention to, right-wing media, to Twitter, to right-wing media. The neocons, the alt-right, the Trump propaganda machine, where he calls real news fake news, and then he tells lies and presents that as reality. there is, and I'm not saying that like he's being coached by Putin or something like that, but he's certainly an admirer of his style.
Well, yes, and I think that kind of goes back to Steve Bannon and Steve Miller, though. They're both very, very big fans of that propagandist message. Bannon ran Breitbart.
Yeah, and it's
a very strong spin from a different angle. It's presenting facts in a different light in a very persuasive way. And I'll say I've read Breitbart articles that are actually accurate, their information's correct, but they're still pushing a narrative that spins it somewhere
even when they're factually accurate. There's a narrative that's disingenuous.
And I'm sure that you could say the same thing about the mainstream media and like CNN especially, but
sometimes. But I don't think there's a comparable equivalent.
Well, there's always been that old running joke of the facts have a liberal slant.
Right. Well,
but
sometimes they do.
It's just an old media joke. But still, this is really the push. Like, this is the entire point, is that there are things happening around us that are important, that are being aired publicly, that we get to watch. But the media does dictate what we pay attention to some degree.
Absolutely.
And,
absolutely.
I, for one, will be the first to admit, I had no idea who Bill Browder was.
Yeah, I mean, struggling on the pronunciation and remembering all these damn names, but like, there's so much here, and it goes so deep, and it's not. This isn't easily digestible information, and I think there's something deliberate in that. This is so convoluted and complicated and hard. You can't put this in a clickbait title. You can't do it. It doesn't.
There's nothing to say.
You're not going to be able to convey what happened.
Exactly.
in a line and a half. It's just not going to happen. You have to dig deep, and you have to be willing to do the work. And that's part of what we try to do here for you guys tonight, is try to make this a little bit digestible. We probably meandered a little bit.
Sure,
but
I think we did.
It's not easy, And
but I wanted to stay on point with that too.
Sure,
is that we really wanted to break this information down a little bit so that it is a little more digestible. And personally, if I'm going to have my own fantasy of helping the American populace understand something that we all might have missed, I hope that somebody's driving on their morning commute to work and they're listening to this and going, holy shit, who is Bill Browder and what the fuck is going on here?
Please, some of these names you've heard, especially Magnitsky.
Magnitsky is a very popular name.
And Bill Browder. Look these names up and look up this Veselnitskaya.
Veselnitskaya, there's a name, man. She's going to be very important.
And that's
I'll tell you, she's going to be very important over
time. To bring it around. She was at the Trump Jr. meeting.
She was the one talking to these people.
She was also the person who was essentially defending the two.
She was their
the defendants for the civil affidavit
money, the $230 million that was stolen
that ended in settlement
with Bill
for
Browder and Magnitsky. The one that essentially Russia convicted Browder and Magnitsky of stealing, like that they falsified this for.
Yeah, and she was here as part of the NGO to have Magnitsky Act repealed, of the smear campaign.
To smear Browder and Magnitsky.
That she engaged like PR firms and all this mess, congressmen who were probably in their pockets, to smear the names of these people.
Oh, hey, by the way,
and have
Dana Rohrabacher, we're looking at you, bro.
Yeah, he's part of that.
I smell you, friend.
Won't even go in there.
I'm not going to. I'm just shout out Dana.
There you go.
We're paying attention.
We're watching. Yeah, and this is fun again, and it was included in the Atlantic article of part of the written testimony. And this went as far as them trying to present at the Newseum in Washington D.C., which is like a journalism museum. Basically a propaganda film.
Yeah, they created a documentary smearing Magnitsky and Browder, and held a gala that had multiple U.S. representatives there. Congressmen went.
Which is insane to me. That anything this ugly.
But apparently, we only let her in to defend this money case.
Right. And yet she's run all over the place.
This,
which again, and every time I hear that, I go, Loretta Lynch let her in.
Yeah, and wondering why.
And you're convinced, and here, this is me being a skeptic, you're convinced that they let her in for specific and legitimate reasons, which I guess on their face, I guess they are. But it makes you wonder a little bit.
Oh, sure. I would have to agree with you there. But what does Loretta Lynch benefit from that?
Yeah, I do not know. And super duper tinfoil hat on that one.
Sure.
Like, and I'm not making any allegations or accusations, but it does raise an eyebrow, so it's worth addressing. But that said, this all this comes back to this lawyer, this Veselnitskaya.
Yes.
And the whole influence campaign, the Russian hacking, and we have the quid pro quo. We have all of these elements are in play.
We'd also have that very convenient excuse is, we just met about Russian adoptions.
Yeah, which clearly had
hopefully you understand the context of what that means
thing
now.
to do. Yeah, with Russian adoptions. But yeah, I think I'm not sure.
I'm sure we've now talked their ears off at this point,
Yeah.
and really just went fact heavy, which is what I wanted to try to avoid. But
we were a little fact heavy. The takeaway, guys, is moose and squirrel.
Moose and squirrel. That's right.
It was moose and squirrel.
It was moose and squirrel.
Yeah, I don't know how else to end that right now.
I mean, yeah, seriously, that's the thing is that that we all need to be aware of who Bill Browder is if you're going to keep up with this, because it's going to become important. I promise.
Yeah,
I can pretty much guarantee.
We're going to hear those names again.
Yeah, you're going to hear Bill Browder's name again.
This is almost like a book report for us.
It
is.
I think
we didn't really fully understand what the hell was going on. We had to do a little bit of research into it. We had to read these things and watch and try to understand and disseminate for ourselves. So I had a clear understanding of the narrative, or clear-ish, and you as well. And just this is for you guys to look at and pay attention, and it's not to be like we were first on this or anything, because we're not. Obviously, Atlantic already had an article out. And
sure, but we want to at least bring out more exposure on it. I mean, I'm kind of pissed at the mainstream media for missing this. I mean, left and right both just ignored it.
By and large, absolutely, because we're all busy watching shiny objects.
Make a fucking ass of himself in this country in the office of the communications of the president. But anyway,
yeah. Destroying our institutions. That's all that's happening.
I will say, though, that I'm sadly disappointed that we didn't get more of that. I mean, 10 days was not enough.
I know, right? I think I had milk that was so fresh.
If I have to,
isn't that the joke, the meme, that if you bought milk the same day he took off,
it'd still be good.
His office, it would still be good when he got fired.
Oh, Lord Almighty! All right, so to wrap
I think
this
we're
thing
done
up,
here.
I think we have. Sorry for dragging you on our little our exploration of facts, but we hope you actually enjoyed it and we maybe enlightened you a little bit. Again, if you've got questions or comments on these things, you think we've got some facts wrong,
especially if you think we're crazy and this is ridiculous.
And I appreciate that, because I love being charged with being crazy, because I like to try to explain why I'm not crazy, which is probably what makes me crazy.
Please tell us why we're wrong. We'll have a civil conversation about it. Hopefully.
Of course, and you can find us on fermentingopinions.com.
That's right.
You can find us on Facebook. We have a closed group, Fermenting Opinions, where you can...
We have a discussion group as well as a public page. We're going to post these videos here. We've not been 100% awesome about that, but we're going to get a little bit better in the future about keeping that thing updated for people to check out the content we're producing. And please check out our YouTube channel, subscribe, give us likes, give us some attention. We need a little bit of love here, guys.
Because on our Wednesdays we do Google Plus Hangouts, essentially, that we broadcast to YouTube.
And come join us.
And that's where we love to have people come join us. Also, if you feel like you could really jump in here on one of these podcasts, we'd be happy to have you call and interview as a guest. You may have to deal with us asking you questions, and we can be rather boring, and sometimes we're funny. And
we're here. We're not. I'm very left leaning myself. He's a libertarian. He's a mixed bag.
Yeah,
and it's okay to disagree. And the only thing I would say to anybody who wants to call in or to talk to us, to be interviewed, to come on the YouTube show, we're going to challenge you respectfully, and emphasis on the respectfully.
Definitely.
There's a really good chance that I'm not going to agree with the things you say, but I can promise to be respectful so long as you are. So, and that's what we're really trying to do here, is sort of the meta goal of Fermenting Opinions.
Is not to have screaming matches and things like that, but to actually entertain each other's ideas, listen to each other's points, and kind of challenge them logically, to discuss rather than to browbeat each other.
Because we need to get back to what's true.
Seriously.
Because, again, to tie into this whole episode and the propaganda machine by the Russians, and just the fact-free world we seem to be living in.
We don't want to
we want to get back to what's true, and we have to be able to have respectful and intelligent conversations about what we think is true and why, and be able to discuss that without throwing stones.
Exactly. So check us out fermentingopinions.com. Check us out on Facebook. For either discussion group, you can apply in there. We'll pretty much just let you in. We also have a public page where we discuss things all the time. On top of that, you can go ahead and fact check us ourselves. We're going to, like I said in the description, we're going to plug the YouTube copy of the video of Mr. Browder's testimony, as well as a link to the Atlantic.
That'll be in the
article.
show notes. The Atlantic article will be in the show notes, so please check that out on the webpage. And with that, I guess
that concludes another episode of Fermenting Opinions.
Yeah, I'm your host, David Papadden.
And I'm your co-host, James McVeigh. Thank you for being with us.
All right, we'll see you next time.